Night had settled the way it does after long days, soft around the edges, loud in the center of the chest. I wasn't searching for forever. I was just searching for proof that tenderness still existed, even in small pixels and blue-lit rooms. The app had become a hallway of strangers, a corridor where names echoed and faded. Then a notification arrived with a line that didn't feel like a line at all. "You look like someone who hides stories behind a brave smile." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. Something in it felt steady. Not hungry, not careless, steady. I typed back and deleted twice, then surrendered to honesty. It surprised me how easily honesty turned into comfort. We compared favorite hours of the day and least favorite versions of ourselves, traded tiny confessions about what keeps a person awake when the city is sleeping. He listened like listening was a skill, not a strategy. I could feel my shoulders lower, my words unclench. By midnight, we'd moved from chat to call. His voice carried warmth like a lamp left on in a safe room. We didn't rush into plans. Instead, we set a simple intention. Meet as we already were, not as we wished to appear. 2 days later, clouds stitched themselves over the city and the forecast promised rain. I chose a cafe with tall windows and a view of passing umbrellas, a place where quiet could stretch without breaking. He arrived early. I recognized him by the way he stood, present, grounded, not scanning the room for exits. When our eyes met, something inside me loosened. No fireworks, no cinematic swell, only a calm that felt extravagant in a world addicted to noise. We spoke like we'd begun the conversation days ago and the body had finally caught up. Laughter came in easy waves. Nerves dissolved into small, true details. The chip in his mug, the way his sleeve held the scent of rain. When the downpour grew heavier, we left the cafe and walked beneath a tired awning that barely held. Water gathered at the edges and spilled over like applause. He offered a hand, not as a performance, but as an invitation to steady ground. Our fingers laced with a quiet click that seemed to organize the air around us. I noticed how my breathing changed. I noticed the absence of a careful mask I'd worn for too long. We wandered along shining streets, past flickering storefronts and puddles that kept small pieces of sky. He didn't crowd. He matched my pace. When the conversation paused, silence didn't accuse. It rested. I told a story I hadn't told in years, the one about a goodbye that left me doubting the architecture of love. He didn't fill the pause that followed. He just said softly, "You deserved gentleness then. You deserve it now." Something inside me believed him. At a crosswalk we stopped, traffic hissing like low applause, city lights trembling on black water. I looked up and found a gaze without demand. Safety can feel like a door unlocking from the inside. I felt it then. Not a rush, but a settling. Not possession, but presence. When we finally said goodnight, the rain had thinned to a lace of silver threads. He walked me to a rideshare and waited until the car pulled away, palm lifted in a small wave that felt like a vow. The message that arrived as I reached my building was simple. I hope the world is softer with you tomorrow. If not, I will be. I held the phone to my chest and let the night be quiet. For the first time in a long time, doubt stepped back and safety stepped forward, and I let both feet stand where the feeling was. Trust didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It gathered like dawn, quiet, patient, unstoppable once it began. We started spending evenings that weren't really dates, just pockets of time where pressure had no place to stand. He'd pull up outside with the windows down and a playlist humming low, the kind of songs that ask nothing and give everything. I'd slide into the passenger seat and feel the city loosen its grip as we drifted past familiar corners that somehow looked new with him beside me. We drove nowhere in particular. Bridges that braided light over water, neighborhoods sleeping behind drawn curtains, empty roads that felt like permission to exhale. Conversation grew in the spaces between streetlights. I learned the stories behind his quiet. A childhood that taught self-reliance too early. A dream shelved to carry a family. A heartbreak that taught caution without killing hope. He listened to mine with that chapel-still attention that makes truth feel brave instead of dangerous. The first time his hand found my knee, it didn't ask. It checked in. A soft pause, a glance, a barely there question that warmed the air around us. I said yes with a breath, and his fingers settled like an anchor, not a claim. Everything with him moved at the speed of sincerity. No performance, no stopwatch. When we touched, the point wasn't to arrive. It was to be present. Nights kept stretching later. After the drives came parked conversations. 2 silhouettes in a quiet lot, dashboard lights painting our faces gold. We traded the kind of details people usually skip. What love had felt like when it was wrong, the first moment we each recognized our own loneliness, the habits we were afraid to bring into something real. I admitted that compliments sometimes slid off me like rain because I didn't know where to hold them. He smiled, squeezed my hand, and said, "Then I'll say things slowly enough that your soul has time to catch them." He kept that promise. Affection arrived as small rituals, a thermos of tea waiting, a spare hoodie folded in the back seat, a note tucked into my pocket before I stepped out to face the day. My body started to memorize the safety of him, his shoulder under my cheek during storms of the mind, the steady rise and fall that reminded me breathing is a kind of prayer. Desire woke up gently without alarms, like sunlight finding a window. It wasn't hunger trying to devour. It was warmth wanting to deepen. On a night stitched with crickets and distant sirens, he asked if he could kiss me. Not assumed, not stolen, asked. I nodded, already aware that the yes had lived inside me for days. The kiss didn't race. It learned, it traced, it listened. I felt the rare sweetness of being cherished, not dazzled. Witnessed, not managed. When we pulled back, forehead to forehead, I laughed because my heart had gone quiet in that particular way it does when something important settles into place. We kept choosing the slow path. Hands that lingered, conversations that unspooled, good nights that respected the morning. In a world that shouts urgency like a sales pitch, we built a sanctuary where the soul led and the body followed, grateful and unafraid. I realized I wasn't falling. I was arriving, step by unhurried step, at a love that made room for all of me. Before I went inside, he looked at me with that steady light and said, "Whenever you're ready for more, say so." I'm not here to take. I'm here to hold. The door inside me opened a little wider, not because desire wasn't present, but because it finally had a safe place to live. Intimacy didn't happen in a flash of heat. It unfolded in increments of trust. Weeks had become a pattern. Texting, drives, small rituals of knowing. Each one laid another brick in a quiet foundation neither of us rushed to name. One night, he cooked dinner at his apartment. Nothing extravagant, just pasta, candles rescued from a drawer, and a record spinning an old love song that crackled at the edges. We moved easily, laughter brushing against the music. Every gesture, passing the salt, pouring wine, felt heavier with meaning, as if the air itself had begun to memorize our breathing. When the plates were cleared, silence arrived again. Soft, deliberate. He looked at me not with hunger but with question. A pause, a tilt of the head that asked, "Is this still safe?" I answered by stepping closer. My heartbeat spoke first. His hands framed my face like a sentence he didn't want to rush. The first kiss was still, almost shy, tasting faintly of wine and wonder. Then came the second, deeper but unhurried, an exhale shared between two people who had finally stopped pretending they weren't trembling. We broke apart just long enough to speak. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Yes," I said, the words simple, whole, entirely mine. The room stayed half-lit. No staged shadows, no audience. Just us learning the geography of closeness. Fabric shifted, skin discovered warmth, and every movement asked before it answered. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Time thinned until all that existed were sensations. Breath against collarbone, fingers tracing lines that felt ancient, heartbeats syncing like a metronome we hadn't realized we shared. He whispered my name like a vow, each syllable a promise not to disappear when morning came. There was laughter, too, clumsy moments, nerves disguised as jokes, the sweet relief of being allowed to be human even in the sacred. And through it all, that same steadiness. Hands pausing to check in, eyes open to confirm yes still meant yes. When stillness finally found us, it wasn't the quiet of emptiness, but of completion. My head rested against his chest, and I listened to the slow percussion of a heart that felt like home. Outside, traffic hummed, rain returned, the city kept spinning. But inside that small room, the world had reduced to warmth and trust. He brushed hair from my face and said, almost to himself, I didn't know tenderness could feel like power. I smiled. Half asleep, half in love. It's because it doesn't take anything away, I murmured. It gives it back. We stayed like that, tracing invisible constellations on each other's skin, memorizing the language we'd built without words. When morning stretched through the blinds, he made coffee and handed me a mug with a grin that didn't demand definition. I realized then that intimacy wasn't the climax of our story. It was the continuation of trust. It was love translated through presence, through patience, through the shared promise to remain kind even when the lights were off. That day, the world outside felt sharper, brighter. I walked home with the quiet certainty that real closeness doesn't consume. It expands. It doesn't rush to claim. It waits to understand. And in that waiting, I found the rhythm I hadn't known I'd been missing. Love, when it's real, doesn't stay untouched. It meets weather, rain that tests the roof, wind that rattles the doors. We were no exception. It began quietly, the way cracks often do. Work called him to another city for months. We promised it would be fine. Calls, texts, visits. But time zones stretch even the strongest bridges. The first few weeks were sweet. Good morning messages, late-night video calls, silly screenshots of breakfast. Then came delays, meetings that ran long, flights that changed. I told myself it was just life. Still, every unreturned message felt like a small silence growing teeth. Fear has a scent. It smells like waiting. I waited through evenings that used to belong to us. The glow of my phone became a mirror reflecting my own doubt. When he finally called, I wanted to sound calm, but the voice that came out carried too much ache. I miss you, I said. I know, he whispered. I miss you too. This project's a mess. I'm trying, I believed him. Yet belief alone couldn't quiet the emptiness. Nights felt heavier without his steady breathing beside me. I tried to fill the space, music, friends, busy work, but there's a loneliness that no distraction can disguise. It's the kind that only the right heartbeat can soften. Weeks later, a message arrived that didn't feel like him. Short, polite, distant. I reread it until tears blurred the words. My first impulse was retreat, to protect myself before disappointment could grow claws. But then another instinct surfaced, quieter yet firmer. Don't run from love just because it's difficult. So I called him. Not to accuse, but to ask, are we okay? He answered after 2 rings. His silence on the other end was full of exhaustion, not indifference. I've been failing at balance, he said. Trying to be enough everywhere and ending up thin everywhere. Something in that confession cracked open my frustration and replaced it with empathy. We talked for hours that night, about fear, about the ghosts of past relationships that taught both of us to expect abandonment. He said he'd pulled back to protect me from his chaos. I told him distance isn't protection. It's erosion if left unchecked. The honesty hurt, but it also healed. A week later, I visited. The airport smell, the sudden sight of him at arrivals, the way his shoulders dropped when our eyes met. It felt like forgiveness made visible. We didn't rush into kisses or grand gestures. We just held on, long enough to remind our bodies that love was still a living thing. That evening, over takeout and soft light, we made a small vow. When things got hard, we'd talk before we vanished. When silence threatened, we'd meet it with truth. When fear whispered, we'd answer with choice. Love didn't return to perfect. It returned to real. There were still missed calls, still tired days, but there was also effort, deliberate and visible. I learned that devotion isn't measured by how easy love feels, but by how gently two people keep rebuilding when it cracks. He looked at me across that small apartment and said, "You still make chaos feel calm." I smiled through tears. "And you still make distance feel smaller." In that moment, I knew. Love isn't the absence of storms. It's the decision to keep standing in the rain together. After distance had tested us and we chose to stay, love began to grow roots instead of wings. The urgency to prove anything faded. In its place came rhythm, ordinary, dependable, quietly extraordinary. He moved back to the city in early spring. The first weekend he arrived, we unpacked boxes together, laughing at how every item carried a small story. My scarf still smelled like his apartment from months ago. His mug had somehow ended up in my kitchen. We realized we'd been building a home long before either of us said the word aloud. Our mornings found their own melody. He made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I burned toast more often than not. Yet the clatter of cups, the scent of caffeine, the shared silence of two people scrolling headlines side by side, these became small vows repeated daily. We learned how to occupy the same space without losing individuality. His work desk faced the window. Mine claimed a corner with plants. Between meetings, he'd reach over just to touch my shoulder, a wordless check-in that said, "I'm here." Even chores turned tender, folding laundry with music playing, grocery trips that ended in spontaneous dancing down aisles. Meeting each other's families came next. Nervous smiles, endless questions, the quiet pride of seeing him slip effortlessly into my world. My father shook his hand with approval hidden behind gruffness. My mother hugged him like she already knew the ending. Later, when I met his family, his sister whispered, "He's lighter since you." It felt like a benediction. At night, we'd cook together, trading roles of chef and critic. Sometimes dinner burned because we got distracted by laughter or by kisses that tasted like garlic and happiness. We'd sit cross-legged on the couch, planning trips we couldn't yet afford, talking about futures we weren't afraid to imagine anymore. One evening, the power went out. Candles scattered their flicker across the room. In that dim glow, he read aloud from a half-finished poem he'd written. "Love isn't loud. It's the hum beneath the noise, the breath between our names, the warmth that waits in the kitchen light." I didn't reply with words. I kissed him slowly, gratitude threaded through every heartbeat. That night wasn't about passion erupting. It was about the deep thrum of belonging. We still argued sometimes, about forgotten chores, about plans that clashed, but even disagreement felt safe. No slammed doors, no cold wars. Just pauses, reflection, apologies offered without pride getting in the way. We were learning the art of choosing each other again and again, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Passion remained, but it had changed shape. It wasn't a wildfire now. It was a hearth, steady, warm, essential. I began to understand that deep love isn't constant intensity. It's constancy itself. It's knowing that even in boredom, in routine, in tired days, the heart still beats toward the same person. Sometimes, lying beside him as the city murmured outside, I'd think, this is what forever actually looks like. No fireworks. Just two souls quietly building something they both believe in. Forever didn't arrive with rings or speeches. It arrived on an ordinary morning when sunlight poured across tangled sheets, and I realized I'd stopped waiting for proof. Love had already built its evidence in our daily life. The shared key by the door, the dent in the pillow where his head rested, the laughter that always found its way back after storms. We never talked much about marriage. Not because we didn't believe in it, but because we'd already begun living the vows people usually recite. Fidelity wasn't a rule we followed. It was a natural rhythm of being. Our promise lived in small, repeated gestures. His coat draped over my shoulders when I forgot one. My reminder texts before his meetings. The way we both said I love you at the same moment every night without planning it. Years passed like chapters of a steady book. We moved into a larger apartment, painted the walls ourselves, ruined our clothes in the process, and laughed until exhaustion replaced the paint fumes. The world kept shifting around us. Jobs changed, friends drifted, parents aged. But our foundation stayed unshaken. Desire didn't fade. It matured. Touch became deeper, not because of novelty, but because of knowledge. Knowing exactly how to comfort, where to linger, how to speak without words. When I traced his face in half light, I saw both the man I met in the rain and the one who stayed through every season that followed. On our 5th anniversary of that first meeting, we returned to the cafe where it began. The same window, the same corner table, but now the ease between us was woven from years of staying. The waiter asked if we were celebrating something special. He smiled and said, "Every day feels like a celebration." After dinner, we walked outside into soft drizzle, the sky remembering that night for us. He stopped under the awning where our hands had first found each other and said quietly, "If we ever decide to marry, I don't want a hall or an audience. I just want this. You, Rain." The sound of the world slowing down, I answered. "Then we're already married." And it felt true. Later that night, wrapped in warmth and candlelight, he whispered promises that didn't need papers to make them real. "I'll keep choosing you on days when love feels effortless and on days when it feels like work. I'll guard your quiet, honor your storms, and never stop learning the language of your heartbeat." My reply came as tears, because sometimes gratitude is too large for words. I kissed him, long and certain, sealing what we'd already been living. Devotion, not spectacle. Intimacy that aged like fine light, not fire. We fell asleep with our fingers intertwined, and I remember thinking how love, in its truest form, doesn't end. It simply changes rhythm. Ours had moved from spark to pulse, from pulse to promise, from promise to peace. Even now, when the world outside feels sharp, I still wake to his steady breathing and know I'm home. The story that began with a swipe has written itself into forever. Not loud, not perfect, but honest. And that honesty is the most romantic thing I've ever known. Love doesn't need a stage. It just needs two souls brave enough to stay when the lights dim. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt the quiet miracle of finding your person, hit that like button, share this with someone who believes in real love, and subscribe for more stories that remind us true love isn't about fireworks. It's about the flame that never goes out.